What if I told you that the performance rating your boss gave you last year, the one that basically determined your bonus, maybe a promotion, and let's be honest, probably your self-worth for a few days. What if I told you that it says almost nothing about your actual work?
Yeah, it's a pretty bitter pill to swallow.
Right.
But when you actually look at the empirical data surrounding performance evaluations, that is exactly what you find. I mean, you walk into that room or, log onto that video call thinking you're getting this objective measurement of your professional value.
Like it's a math equation or something.
Exactly. But in reality, you're often just getting a readout of your manager's own cognitive blind spots.
Which is just wild to think about. It completely flips the script on how we view our careers. And, maybe you are listening to this right now while gearing up for one of those major team reviews, or maybe you're trying to figure out the latest HR trends, or honestly, maybe you're just insanely curious about why the modern workplace feels so disconnected from the actual work we do.
Which is a lot of people, I think.
Oh, absolutely. So today, we're going to challenge basically everything you thought you knew about the dreaded annual performance review. We've got this really compelling stack of research for our deep dive today that suggests the whole system is, well, on the verge of a systemic overhaul.
Yeah, and we are working primarily from this really eye-opening article by Dr. Jonathan H. Westover from Future State University. It's titled Transforming Personnel Evaluation in the Digital Age, Integrating HR Metrics, AI Analytics, and Empathy-Led Leadership.
Bit of a mouthful, but it's good.
It is. And the core of his piece heavily builds on this framework from 2026 by a researcher named Illish. It's known as the Integrated Personnel Evaluation Model, or IPM.
Right. And the mission of our deep dive into these sources today is to really explore how this universally despised annual ritual is being dismantled, just brick by brick.
And rebuilt.
Exactly, and rebuilt using this incredibly counterintuitive combination of tools. We're talking about the raw calculating power of big data and artificial intelligence, but, and this is the key part, intertwined with deeply intentional human empathy.
Which sounds like an oxymoron, right? AI and empathy.
It totally does. But we're going to break down how these three elements can actually function together as an ecosystem.
Yeah.
One that moves away from just like judging you and moves towards genuinely helping you grow. Okay, let's unpack this because to understand where we're going, we first have to understand the mechanics of why the current system fails so consistently.
Right. And Dr. Westover points out early on that traditional appraisals were built for an era of work that simply does not exist anymore.
Like the industrial age.
Exactly. We're talking about a world of highly stable jobs, rigid reporting hierarchies, and, very linear career trajectories.
Where tasks were completely standardized. I mean, if your job was to stamp metal parts on an assembly line, evaluating you was simple math. Your supervisor just walked by and counted the widgets you produced in an 8-hour shift.
Right. The measurement perfectly matched the reality of the work. But the nature of work has just fundamentally shifted. Today, we operate in these fast-paced, highly collaborative, fluid digital environments.
We're knowledge workers now.
Yes. Your job description today might look entirely different in 6 months because a project pivoted, or some new technology emerged, or a global event totally disrupted your supply chain.
And trying to evaluate that level of fluidity with a rigid once-a-year form, I mean, it's like trying to measure the volume of a flowing river using a wooden ruler.
That's a great way to put it.
It just doesn't capture the reality at all. But as the source material outlines, this structural mismatch is really just the surface of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, it gets worse. The deeper, more insidious flaw is epistemological. It's about how organizations actually think they can extract truth about human performance.
Which brings us back to that writer effect idea from the beginning.
Right. This concept absolutely shatters the illusion of objectivity in corporate evaluations. There's this landmark study from the year 2000 by Scullin, Mount, and Goff. They basically set out to understand the variance in performance ratings. Like when a supervisor gives you a 4 out of 5 on leadership or, strategic thinking, what biological or psychological mechanisms are actually generating that specific number?
And they found that it isn't actually a reflection of your leadership or your strategic thinking at all.
No, not really. They discovered that a vast majority of the variance in a rating reflects the supervisor's own idiosyncrasies, not the employee's performance.
Wow.
Yeah. You have to remember the human brain is an energy-saving machine. It relies heavily on heuristics, these mental shortcuts, to process complex information.
Because it's too much data otherwise.
Exactly. When a manager sits down to evaluate 12 whole months of your complex knowledge work, their brain literally cannot retrieve and weigh every email, every meeting, and every project accurately. It takes way too much caloric energy.
So the brain just panics and takes a shortcut.
Precisely. It defaults to cognitive biases. Take the halo effect, for example.
Oh, I've heard of this.
Right. So if you happen to be exceptional at one highly visible thing, say you give fantastic PowerPoint presentations, your manager's brain creates a halo around you. It unconsciously assumes you must also be great at time management, peer mentorship, budgeting, even if you are terribly disorganized.
Just because the slides looked good.
Yes. And the reverse is the horns effect, where one visible failure taints everything else.
And then there's recency bias, right? Like, if I crush a massive $1 million project in February, but I make a minor scheduling mistake in November, right before evaluation season.
Your manager's brain grabs onto November because it is fresh in their working memory.
That is so frustrating.
It is. You also have similarity bias, where managers unconsciously give higher ratings to employees who share their background or their communication style or even their hobbies.
Oh, the classic "we both play golf" bump.
Exactly. So when you aggregate all these cognitive shortcuts, the rating you receive is essentially an autobiography of your manager's mental state and their preferences, heavily disguised as an objective metric of your worth.
I was trying to think of how to visualize this, and it feels like going to a doctor to assess your year-round cardiovascular health, but they only check your pulse once in late December, while you happen to be wearing a heavy winter coat and after you just ran up a flight of stairs.
Right. Terrible data.
And on top of that, the doctor inherently prefers people who have the same eye color as them. I mean, how could a medical professional possibly prescribe a legitimate health plan based on that one wildly distorted data point?
They couldn't. It would literally be medical malpractice.
Right.
Yet in the corporate world, organizations use these distorted single point-in-time ratings to distribute millions of dollars in bonuses to dictate who gets promoted to leadership and ultimately to decide who loses their livelihood.
Which is terrifying. And employees aren't foolish, you know. They instinctively feel the illegitimacy of the system.
Which triggers an entirely different psychological defense mechanism. The research calls it the dual-purpose dilemma. This was introduced by Murphy and Cleveland back in 1995. And honestly, this explains so much about why those review meetings always feel so painfully awkward.
Because they're trying to do two things at once.
Exactly. The dual-purpose dilemma highlights a profound conflict in the architecture of the annual review. Organizations are attempting to accomplish two mutually exclusive psychological goals in the exact same one-hour meeting.
Right, okay, break those down.
First, they are evaluating you. They are grading your past performance to justify a salary increase or a bonus. So this is a judgment of your worth.
Which puts you immediately on edge.
Yes. And second, in the very same breath, they try to pivot to development. They lean in and ask, so what are your weaknesses? Where are you struggling? How can I, as your manager, help you grow?
But you can't mix judgment with development.
You really can't. When an employee knows that their financial livelihood and their career progression hinge on appearing flawless to the person across the table, their brain perceives a threat to its survival resources. You go into what psychologists call impression management mode.
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
I mean, if my mortgage payment depends on you thinking I am an absolute rock star, I am absolutely not going to sit there and open up about how I'm struggling to understand the new software integration or how I feel completely overwhelmed by my workload.
No, you put on armor.
I'm going to spin every single failure into a, learning opportunity, minimize my mistakes, and rigorously control the narrative.
And that impression management completely paralyzes authentic self-reflection. Because vulnerability is actively punished by the evaluative side of the meeting, the developmental side just becomes pure theater.
Just a performance.
Yeah. The organization walks away with zero genuine insight into where their workforce actually needs training or support, and the employee walks away feeling exhausted by the act they just had to put on.
So the baseline is just a disaster. The annual review is essentially a biased supervisor giving you a cognitively distorted grade while you sit there pretending you have zero weaknesses just so you can pay your rent.
That's about a pretty accurate summary, yes?
So if the old way is this structurally and psychologically compromised, organizations obviously had to search for an alternative, right? And that search gave birth to a trend that has really dominated the last decade, continuous performance management. But looking at the sources, it seems like this cure might actually be worse than the disease.
Well, the shift made logical sense on paper at first. Capelli and Tavis documented this pivot heavily around 2016. Companies started to realize that the annual cadence was just too slow. And forced distribution rankings, where you arbitrarily fire the bottom 10% every year, were totally destroying morale.
Jack Welch style.
Right. So they moved toward continuous check-ins and agile goal setting.
This is where we see the explosion of OKRs, right? Objectives and key results,
Yeah.
built on John Doerr's framework.
Yes, exactly. And the logic is very appealing. Instead of setting a rigid goal in January and getting penalized for missing it in December, when the entire market changed in May, you set fluid goals. If the company pivots, your OKRs pivot in real time.
Which sounds great.
It does. And to manage this continuous recalibration, organizations needed continuous measurement. This actually aligned perfectly with the logic of the balanced scorecard, which was introduced by Kaplan and Norton back in the early 90s, arguing for tracking multiple facets of business performance.
But now, driven by the digital age, this tracking was basically put on steroids. We entered the era of the HR metrics boom. Organizations started tracking inputs, processes, outputs, just incessantly.
Because we have the tools for it now.
Yeah.
We live in Slack, Microsoft Teams, Jira, Asana, Salesforce. We are generating an endless digital exhaust of behavioral data.
Every click is logged.
Every click. And I can see how, theoretically, an HR executive would look at this and think, perfect, we don't have to rely on a manager's biased memory anymore. We have the hard, granular data of exactly what every employee is doing every second of the day.
But Angrave and his colleagues published research in 2016 issuing a really stark warning about this exact assumption, didn't they?
They did. They argued that simply accumulating a mountain of digital data does not magically result in better or fairer decision-making. In fact, many continuous HR analytics initiatives fail spectacularly because organizations completely lack the psychological framework to translate raw behavioral data into supportive interventions.
Wait, let me stop you right there, because my alarm bells are definitely ringing. When I hear continuous performance management and endless behavioral data, I don't hear a supportive intervention.
What do you hear?
I hear Big Brother. I hear a surveillance nightmare. Like, are we talking about tracking my keystrokes, monitoring how many milliseconds my mouse has been idle? Because if my boss is digitally hovering over my shoulder 24/7, that sounds like a dystopian nightmare that has nothing to do with helping me grow.
Your skepticism is not only entirely justified, it is empirically validated by the research. When an organization implements continuous data tracking without redefining the underlying psychological contract with its employees, it inevitably devolves into continuous surveillance.
It just becomes a weapon.
It becomes a tool of control rather than a tool of development.
And what does that actually do to the employee?
It forces them into a state of hypercompliance. Employees start focusing on doing deep, meaningful work and instead focus entirely on feeding the metric system what it wants to see.
Oh, I've seen this. If you track mouse movement, people will just go buy automatic mouse jigglers on Amazon.
Exactly. If you track the volume of emails sent, people will send 50 pointless emails a day just to hit the quota. They are just trying to keep the system off their back.
It reminds me of that old Soviet nail factory joke. Have you heard that one?
I'm not sure. How does it go?
So the government tells the factory they will be measured by the total weight of the nails they produce. So the factory just produces one gigantic 10-ton nail.
Right.
And the next month, the government says, no, we will measure you by the total quantity of nails. So the factory produces millions of microscopic, totally unusable pins. It's like that quote, tell me how you will measure me, and I will tell you how I will behave.
That is exactly it. In the literature, that is known as metric gaming, and it's a central theme in Locke and Latham's 2002 research on goal-setting theory. When evaluation systems are perceived as unfair, or when the metrics lack a clear line of sight to the actual meaningful goals of the organization, employees just detach from the mission.
You just play the game.
Right. They optimize purely for the measured indicator, even if it actively harms the company. Furthermore, they become deeply risk-averse.
Because why would you ever try a new, innovative approach if failing at it ruins your daily metrics and flags you as a low performer in the system? You're just going to stick to the safest, most predictable routine.
Exactly. And this is where the conversation moves from abstract psychology to just brutal financial reality. When evaluation becomes surveillance, it bleeds the company dry. The organizational hemorrhage is profound.
The sources have some specific numbers on this, right?
They do. Fraser and colleagues conducted research in 2017 demonstrating that organizations in the top quartile of employee engagement experience roughly 20% higher profitability compared to those in the bottom quartile.
A 20% variance in profitability based purely on engagement. That's massive.
It is. And this is heavily reinforced by a really comprehensive 2024 study out of Oxford University by Deneve and his team. They analyzed these massive data sets and proved a direct causal correlation between workplace well-being and firm profitability, return on assets, and overall market valuation.
A causal link. Which completely demolishes this outdated kind of Gordon Gekko era corporate myth that pushing people to the absolute brink of misery and paranoia is how you squeeze out maximum shareholder value. Well-being is not a ping-pong table in the break room or a free yoga class on Fridays.
No, it's a mathematical, strategic imperative. If your continuous evaluation system relies on surveillance that makes people paranoid, it is quite literally destroying the financial value of the firm. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the financial hemorrhage is really simply a byproduct of the severe human toll these systems take. To understand why profitability tanks, you have to look at what happens to the human brain under surveillance.
Which brings us to Amy Edmondson's work, right?
Yes, her foundational 1999 concept of psychological safety.
Right. And psychological safety is essentially the shared belief within a team that you won't be punished, humiliated, or retaliated against for taking an interpersonal risk. It means you can say, I messed up, or I don't understand this, or hey, what if we try this wild idea without fear of being destroyed in your next review?
Precisely. Now, combine the lack of psychological safety with Dew and Cooper's 2021 research on workplace stress. When you place a human being in a highly evaluative, surveillance-heavy environment, you activate their biological threat response.
The amygdala.
Yes, the amygdala perceives the continuous tracking not as a management tool, but as a predator.
So your body literally floods with cortisol.
Yes, you enter a state of chronic, low-grade fight or flight. And biologically, when the brain is flooded with stress hormones, it reroutes energy away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain responsible for executive function, creative problem-solving, and complex collaboration.
Wait, so you literally, neurologically, lose your cognitive flexibility.
You do?
That is a staggering paradox. I mean,
Yeah.
the company implements a rigorous, continuous evaluation system because they want to maximize your output. But the stress of being continuously evaluated shuts down the specific part of your brain required to actually do modern knowledge work.
The company causes the very burnout they're trying to measure.
And then, at the end of the year, they look at your exhausted, uncreative output, and they punish you with a lower rating for being disengaged.
It is a self-fulfilling doom loop. Conventional systems optimize for compliance and output while fundamentally ignoring the biological and psychological capacity of the human being doing the work. They destroy the very performance they exist to track.
Okay, this paints a deeply grim reality. The baseline annual review is a biased fiction. The modern continuous data fix often turns into a toxic surveillance dystopia that ruins mental health and tanks profitability. It kind of feels like we're trapped. How do we actually build a system that measures complex work accurately without triggering a biological threat response in the workforce?
Well, this leads us directly to the core of Dr. Westover's article and the first layer of Illich's 2026 IPEM framework.
Okay, let's get into the framework.
Illich's IPEM, the Integrated Personnel Evaluation Model, proposes that you cannot solve this with a single tool. It requires a socio-technical system.
Meaning what exactly?
It means it explicitly weaves together technological architecture with human psychology and social dynamics. You can't just fix the tech, and you can't just fix the psychology. You have to integrate them. Layer 1 of this framework is fundamentally about building a better yardstick. Illich terms it multidimensional HR metrics architectures.
Okay, break that jargon down for us.
Yeah.
A multidimensional architecture just means we have to stop defining success solely by the final output, right? Like, if you only look at the final score of a basketball game, you know who won, but you have zero data on how the team passed the ball, how they defended, or who was the best team player.
That's a perfect analogy.
We have to measure the inputs and the processes, not just the final deliverable.
Exactly. Optimization requires holistic visibility. Let's look at how Westover illustrates this with some concrete industry examples. Consider the finance sector. Historically, a client relationship manager at a bank would be evaluated almost exclusively on a singular output metric, revenue generation. Like, how much capital did you bring into the firm this quarter?
Which creates a terrifying incentive structure. If my mortgage depends on hitting a revenue target and I am falling short, I am highly incentivized to sell complex, high-risk products to clients who maybe shouldn't be buying them. I don't care about the risk because the system only measures the revenue.
And that is exactly how you get catastrophic institutional failures. But under layer one of the IPM, a financial firm actively expands the yardstick. Yes, they still measure revenue, that is the output, but they simultaneously evaluate the manager on internal process metrics like loan portfolio quality and risk management protocols.
So they're checking the work along the way.
Exactly. They also measure governance metrics like strict adherence to regulatory compliance, and they measure customer metrics like long-term client satisfaction and retention.
So if I try to game the system by pushing a terrible loan to inflate my revenue, my risk management metric tanks, and my client satisfaction metric tanks,
Yes. The multidimensional architecture makes it mathematically impossible to succeed by being a bad actor. You have to balance your performance across the entire ecosystem of the job.
that makes so much sense.
And Westover highlights another brilliant application of this in the tech industry. Traditionally, software engineers were often evaluated on coding speed or the sheer volume of code committed. Again, a pure output metric.
Which just incentivizes an engineer to write a massive volume of sloppy, bug-ridden code, leaving the rest of the team to clean up the mess. It's the classic brilliant jerk archetype.
Precisely. So, under layer one, tech companies are utilizing multidimensional tracking. They measure output, sure, but they also evaluate collaborative processes. Are you actively participating in peer code reviews? How responsive are you when a critical bug needs resolution?
Are you a team player, basically?
Exactly. Are you dedicating time to mentoring junior developers or documenting your architecture so others can actually learn from it?
It measures the invisible work, the glue that actually holds a team together, which usually goes completely unrewarded in a traditional review.
Yes, it quantifies the behaviors that build long-term organizational health rather than just short-term individual output. But there is a crucial caveat here. You cannot just mandate these new metrics from the top down.
Right, because if the executive suite just invents 20 new metrics to track me on without my input, we are immediately back in the surveillance dystopia. The psychological contract is still broken. So how does Layer 1 avoid that trap?
Through mandatory participatory goal setting, the psychological research is unequivocal on this. An employee's commitment to a goal skyrockets when they have a hand in authoring that goal. Westover cites a case study of a global professional services firm to illustrate this.
What do they do?
Well, for decades, their primary evaluation metric was a grueling, non-negotiable quota of billable hours.
Oh, and billable hours are the ultimate flawed metric because
Okay.
they only measure how long your chair is occupied, not the actual value you deliver to the client. It literally rewards inefficiency. If it takes me 10 hours to do something you can do in 2, I look like the better employee under a billable hour quota.
It is a deeply flawed architecture, and it resulted in massive burnout and turnover at this firm. So they radically overhauled the system. They eliminated the strict billable hour quota entirely.
Wow, really?
Completely. Instead, partners and junior associates sat down together at the start of every single quarter to collaboratively co-create their OKRs.
What kind of goals did they set instead of hours, then?
They set outcome-based goals focused on actual client impact. So delivering a specific strategic report or successfully migrating a client's software. But because the employees had a voice, they also baked in developmental OKRs.
Like what?
They set goals for firm-building activities. Things like researching a new market trend, designing a new internal training module, or spearheading a diversity initiative.
I see. By giving the employee a voice in the architecture of their own evaluation, you restore their agency. They aren't just subjects being measured, they are active architects of their own career path. And I know Westover mentions that organizations use real-time dashboards to track all these new OKRs. But again, a dashboard is just a tool. The intent behind it is what matters.
Intent is everything. Westover details a multinational tech corporation that built highly sophisticated real-time dashboards for their engineering teams. But they fundamentally shifted the governance of that tool. The dashboard was not designed for the manager to monitor the employee.
What was it for?
It was designed as a shared visibility tool for the whole team.
So if the dashboard shows that a particular 2-week sprint is failing, or bug resolution times are suddenly spiking, the manager's role isn't to swoop in with a clipboard and assign blame.
No, the manager is trained to use that data to initiate a resource conversation. They say, hey, the dashboard shows we are bottlenecking on this integration. Is the workload distributed unevenly? Are we waiting on an external vendor? What structural roadblocks can I remove for you?
It shifts the manager's posture from a judge sitting across the table to a coach standing next to you looking at the same problem. I love the theory of this. Multidimensional metrics, participatory goal setting, shared dashboards. It sounds incredibly healthy. But let's introduce a little logistical reality here. If we are tracking revenue, risk compliance, client satisfaction, code reviews, mentoring hours, and firm building activities.
Right.
Well, sorry, I mean, that is an astronomical volume of data points. If I'm a manager with 15 direct reports, I simply do not have the cognitive bandwidth to monitor, synthesize, and extract meaningful insights from thousands of data streams in real time. The human brain cannot do it.
You have hit the exact limitation of Layer 1. The multidimensional yardstick is structurally sound, but it generates an informational load that breaks human processing capacity. To make the system functional, you must introduce a processing engine capable of handling that complexity. And that brings us to Layer 2 of the IPM framework,
Which is,
AI-enabled people analytics.
this is where we bring in the artificial intelligence, not as a manager replacement, but as a synthesis engine. And according to the research by Tombe and colleagues in 2019, this introduces a paradigm shift. It moves evaluation from being retrospective, arguing about what happened 9 months ago, to being real-time and, more importantly, predictive.
Yes, the predictive capabilities are where this technology becomes truly transformative. Dr. Westover details a scenario involving a massive financial institution. They were losing top talent to competitors at an alarming rate, and by the time an employee handed in a resignation letter, it was obviously far too late to save them. So they built machine learning models specifically designed to identify flight risk employees.
How does an algorithm predict human behavior like a resignation? Like, what is it actually looking at?
It looks at the metadata of your digital footprint to establish a baseline of your normal behavioral patterns, and then it scans for deviations. For instance, the AI analyzes communication network centrality.
Okay, break that down. What does network centrality mean in plain English?
It's basically a mathematical mapping of your social influence and connectivity within the company. The algorithm looks at calendar invites, Slack channel participation, and email frequency. Not the content of the messages, just the traffic flow.
Right, privacy-wise, they aren't reading the emails.
Exactly. If you are typically highly central, meaning you are in a lot of cross-functional meetings, people message you often for advice, you reply quickly, that establishes your baseline.
So what happens when I start burning out or secretly interviewing for other jobs?
Your network centrality begins to collapse, often months before you consciously realize you are leaving. You stop volunteering for optional committees. Your reply times to non-urgent emails stretch from 2 hours to 2 days. You drop out of the social Slack channels. You isolate.
And the machine sees all of this.
The machine learning model detects this subtle behavioral withdrawal. It combines that with data on your learning activity like, did you stop logging into the training portal? And your historical performance velocity?
And how accurate was this system at the financial institution?
Staggeringly accurate. The AI was able to identify which employees were at a critical risk of resigning 6 months before the employee actually quit.
6 months. That is incredible. The AI recognizes the behavioral symptoms of burnout and disengagement before the employee has even updated their LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
But the crucial part is what the company does with that prediction. They didn't use the data to preemptively fire them, right?
No, the prediction triggered a retention protocol. Because HR and the direct manager had 6 months of lead time, they could intervene proactively. The manager would schedule a career mapping conversation, they would ask about workload, offer a rotation to a new project, or even adjust compensation if the market had shifted.
Wow.
By intervening early, this institution reduced regretted attrition among their high performers by 1/3, which saved them millions in recruitment and onboarding costs.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. They aren't just using AI to crunch numbers and map metadata. They are unleashing natural language processing, or NLP, to actually analyze human communication and catch the biases we talked about in the very beginning.
This is arguably one of the most vital applications of AI for organizational equity. Dr. Westover highlights a fascinating 2024 study by Modad and colleagues. They looked at a global consulting firm that was trying to understand why women were not advancing to senior partner roles at the same rate as men, despite having identical numerical performance ratings.
Right, because if you just look at the raw numbers on a spreadsheet, the men are averaging a 4.2 out of 5, and the women are averaging a 4.2 out of 5. To a human HR executive looking at a bar chart, the system looks perfectly egalitarian. There's no visible bias.
But numbers only tell a fraction of the story. The consulting firm deployed an NLP algorithm to read and analyze the actual narrative text, the qualitative feedback that managers had written about their employees in the review forms.
And what does NLP actually do with that text?
Natural language processing involves tokenizing words, analyzing semantics, and mapping the relationships between the adjectives used and the demographic profiles of the subjects.
And the NLP algorithm uncovered a massive systemic discrepancy that the human eye completely missed.
It did. It found that managers, both male and female managers, by the way, were utilizing drastically different semantic framing depending on the gender of the employee.
Even with the exact same numerical rating.
Yes. Even when evaluating a male and a female consultant who had delivered the exact same financial results and received the exact same 4.2 numerical rating, the language diverged. The female consultants were consistently praised using communal language. They were lauded for their communication style, their empathetic teamwork, and their ability to support the group.
Which are great qualities, but they are framing her as a helper. What were they saying about the men?
The male consultants with the exact same performance were praised using agentic language. They were lauded for their strategic vision, their decisive leadership, and their raw potential to drive the business forward.
Wow. So, the women are being rhetorically framed as fantastic support staff, and the men are being framed as future executives. And when it comes time for the executive committee to decide who gets tapped for the promotion to partner, they naturally choose the person described as a strategic visionary over the person described as a great communicator.
Exactly. The AI literally acted as an automated bias auditor. It caught the unconscious prejudice that was choking the pipeline.
That is just brilliant.
It is. The algorithm brought the invisible bias into the light. Once the firm had empirical proof of the semantic difference, they could mandate targeted manager training to ensure that leadership criteria were applied uniformly, regardless of gender. The AI provided a level of objective scrutiny that a human HR department simply didn't have the capacity to perform on thousands of reviews.
I am totally amazed by the capability, but I have to push back here. As a listener, I am trying to imagine living under this system. If an algorithm knows my network centrality, and it knows my burnout risk, and it's auditing my manager's language, I mean, are we just handing the keys to our professional destinies over to a black box?
That's the fear, isn't it?
Yeah. If the AI calculates that I am a low performer based on some obscure data point I can't even see, where is the human in the loop? Because if you train an AI on historical corporate data, aren't you just teaching it to automate all the terrible biases of the past?
That is the existential danger of Layer 2, and it is a major focus in the research by Raghavan in 2020 and Wachter in 2021. They heavily emphasize the critical need for algorithmic fairness and governance. To use a metaphor, an AI is essentially a high-definition mirror reflecting your organization's historical data.
Okay, so it reflects.
Yes. It does not invent a new reality. It just reflects the past at a massive scale. If a company has a historical track record of primarily promoting young men from Ivy League schools, the machine learning model looks in the mirror and mathematically deduces, being a young man from an Ivy League school is the optimal formula for success.
So it treats the historical bias as a feature, not a bug. It just learns to discriminate faster and more efficiently than a human ever could.
Precisely. Which is why Dr. Westover stresses that robust governance is non-negotiable. He details a tech company that recognized this danger and instituted a strict algorithmic fairness review committee. They do not blindly trust the machine's output. They run rigorous demographic parity testing every single quarter.
What does that testing actually entail in practice?
It means they simulate the AI's recommendations across different demographic groups before implementing them. If the AI suggests that 15% of male engineers are ready for promotion, but only 2% of female engineers are ready, the committee flags the algorithm for retraining.
They don't just accept it.
No, they assume the model is flawed, not the workforce. Furthermore, they enforce strict explainability requirements.
Explainability meaning the AI can't just be a mysterious oracle that spits out a verdict like, fire John, promote Sarah.
Exactly. The AI must produce an interpretable, mathematically sound rationale that a human manager and the employee can read, understand, and debate. It has to say, I am flagging this employee as a flight risk specifically because their cross-functional meeting attendance has dropped by 40% and their code commit velocity has decreased over 3 sprints. If the AI cannot explain its reasoning in human terms, the output is discarded.
I appreciate the safeguards. I really do. Demographic parity testing and explainability are great. But even with those protections, if we stop here, I still feel like a cog in a highly optimized digital machine. The metrics in Layer 1 are better, the AI in Layer 2 is predicting trends and auditing bias, but it still feels cold. It still feels like a system designed to manage a server farm, not human beings.
And if an organization stops at layer 2, Illich's framework explicitly states that the system will fail. The technology alone cannot heal the psychological contract. The AI is a brilliant engine for processing data, but you would never drive a car that only has a powerful engine and no steering wheel.
You'd crash immediately.
Exactly. You need a mechanism to guide that power safely. That steering wheel is layer 3, empathy-led leadership.
Empathy. It
Yeah.
sounds like a soft skill, almost like corporate fluff. But the framework positions empathy as a hard, structural requirement of the management job, not just a pleasant personality trait that you hope your boss happens to possess.
It is the ultimate differentiator. The most sophisticated multidimensional metrics and the most advanced predictive AI are completely useless if the relational quality of the conversation between the manager and the employee remains toxic. Empathy is the biological antidote to the threat response we discussed earlier. It is the mechanism that creates psychological safety.
So how do organizations architect empathy into the system?
First, by annihilating the massive anxiety-inducing annual review meeting and replacing it with continuous in-the-flow microfeedback.
This reminds me of the healthcare case study Westover included. Nursing is an inherently chaotic, high-stress profession, right? And clinical turnover is notoriously high. This particular healthcare organization completely overhauled their leadership model. They actually forbade managers from hoarding criticisms for 6 months to dump on a nurse during a formal review.
Instead, they required managers to provide immediate, highly specific microfeedback right after a clinical task was completed. But the crucial shift was the psychological framing. They trained managers extensively on how to frame feedback developmentally rather than evaluatively.
This is the difference between a judge and a coach. Like, if a nurse struggles with a new patient charting system, the manager doesn't say, "You failed at charting today, -1 point on your record." That triggers the cortisol spike.
Right. Instead, the manager uses a developmental frame. Hey, I noticed the new charting protocol was slowing you down today. I know the interface is clunky. Here's why the data matters for the next shift. And here's a shortcut I use to get through it faster. Let's practice it.
It entirely lowers the stakes. The feedback becomes an act of support rather than an act of judgment.
And the result of this framing shift, a measurable, sustained decrease in nursing turnover, which in the modern healthcare industry is practically miraculous.
Another massive structural element of Layer 3 is the concept of structured self-reflection. Illich's framework insists that employees cannot just be passive subjects waiting to receive a verdict from on high.
Yeah.
They have to be active agents in their own assessment.
Yes, Dr. Westover cites an international manufacturing company that mandated quarterly structured self-assessments. But the genius of their approach is the sequencing.
The sequencing.
Yes, the employee completes the deep self-assessment before they ever sit down with the manager.
Yes. It completely flips the power dynamic of the meeting. The employee has to review their own multidimensional OKRs, identify where they struggled, articulate what they learned, and formally propose their own development activities for the next quarter.
Exactly. When the manager finally sits down, they aren't initiating a judgment. They are forced to respond to the employee's lived experience. It anchors the entire dialogue in the employee's perspective.
It forces a collaborative partnership. But organizations know that human nature is stubborn. For any of this to truly take root, the company has to put its money where its mouth is regarding empathy. You cannot hand a manager a pamphlet on active listening and then evaluate that same manager entirely on their ability to hit ruthless quarterly financial targets.
Because if push comes to shove, the manager will abandon empathy to hit the financial target to save their own job.
Right, which brings us to the concept of empathy as a KPI, a key performance indicator. This is where the structural change gets real. A professional services firm actually develops others through empathetic coaching, a formal mathematically weighted evaluation criterion for all people managers.
And they did not bury it as a tiny 5% footnote. They weighted it as 20% of a manager's entire overall performance review. 1/5 of their professional success and financial bonus was tied directly to their capacity for empathy.
How do you even measure that objectively, though?
They implemented rigorous 360-degree feedback, where direct reports specifically assess their manager's empathetic behaviors, like, does my manager listen actively? Do they recognize when I am overwhelmed? Do they support my career goals? Furthermore, this is where we see the brilliant synergy of the IPM framework.
Where the layers connect.
Yes, this is where Layer 2, the AI, and Layer 3, empathy emerge. The organization provided these managers with AI-generated well-being dashboards.
So the dashboard isn't showing lines of code or sales calls. What is it showing?
It surfaces aggregated, anonymized team-level data. It shows team engagement trends, work-life balance indicators, and the network centrality data we discussed earlier. The manager isn't left guessing if their team is nearing burnout. The system mathematically flags the friction. The manager is practicing data-informed empathy.
That is a phenomenal synthesis. The technology, which is incredibly good at recognizing patterns in vast amounts of data, surfaces the invisible struggles. And the human manager, who is uniquely capable of compassion, provides the empathetic intervention.
The machine diagnoses the friction, and the human applies the cure.
Precisely. Which leads us into the final evolutionary stage of this deep dive, evolving the system and redefining the psychological contract. True empathy means recognizing when someone is running on fumes, and modern integrated evaluation systems are formally baking well-being into the core definition of what it means to be a high performer.
It is a radical departure from the corporate ethos of the 20th century. For decades, traditional systems implicitly and sometimes explicitly rewarded the road to burnout.
Oh, absolutely. If you were the employee working 80 hours a week, answering emails at midnight on a Sunday, the system branded you as a hard worker, a go-getter. You got the promotion.
The new integrated systems view that exact same behavior through a totally different lens. They recognize that working 80 hours a week is not a virtue. It is a leading indicator of an impending performance collapse.
Dr. Westover gives a powerful example of a financial services organization that reconfigured their analytics dashboards to flag excessive overtime. But they didn't flag it to give the employee a gold star for dedication. They flagged it as a systemic failure warning.
Yes, when the AI detected a sustained spike in a team member's hours, it prompted the manager to initiate a mandatory support conversation.
And the conversation isn't, great job working the weekend. The conversation is, why are you working the weekend? Is the project scope poorly defined? Are you carrying the weight of an underperforming colleague? Do we need to pause and hire more resources?
They treated excessive overtime as an organizational flaw to be solved, not an individual sacrifice to be celebrated.
Which is such a healthier approach.
It is. This mindset shift ties directly into the growing movement to decouple performance evaluation from presenteeism. Research by Niffin and his colleagues in 2021 demonstrated that providing flexible work arrangements and autonomy is one of the most critical levers for stress reduction, particularly for employees with caregiving responsibilities.
Westover highlights a tech company that took the Niffin research to its absolute logical extreme. They completely scrubbed any reference to working hours or physical office location from their performance evaluation rubric.
Totally removed it.
Yeah, they judged employees purely and exclusively on the quality of their multidimensional outcomes and their collaborative processes.
If you are a working parent and your optimal schedule is working deeply from 5:00 a.m. to 11:00 a.m. so you can pick up your kids and then logging back on for a brief sprint at night, the system does not care. If you deliver exceptional code, participate in your peer reviews asynchronously, and meet your OKRs, your seat time is irrelevant.
And what was the business result of trusting people like that?
Skyrocketing retention. They saw massive improvements in retaining working parents, caregivers, and neurodivergent employees who thrived outside the sensory overload of a traditional 9-to-5 office environment. It proved empirically that you can drive elite performance without demanding performative presence.
But, and this is a massive but, an organization cannot just flip a switch and expect employees to trust this new reality.
No, because of the evaluation baggage, we have all been burned by the annual review. If an HR rep suddenly announces, hey everyone, we have a shiny new AI dashboard that is going to track your multidimensional OKRs to help you grow, the collective workforce is going to roll their eyes.
They'll just assume it is a more efficient digital guillotine.
Exactly. Illich's framework emphasizes that organizations must explicitly and transparently renegotiate the psychological contract. They have to declare and then mathematically prove that the system has moved from a mechanism of judgment and control to a mechanism of development and support.
How do you mathematically prove trust?
Through rigorous regulatory compliance and systemic transparency, we are already seeing leading companies prepare for legislation like the EU AI Act. Westover mentions a European financial institution that got ahead of the curve by instituting strict contestability mechanisms.
This is the ultimate safeguard against algorithmic tyranny. Contestability. Explain how it works for the employee.
It means that if the AI-assisted evaluation flags you as a low performer or suggests you are not ready for a leadership role, you are not trapped by the machine's verdict. You have a formal, legally protected right to challenge that conclusion.
You can fight it.
Yes, you can demand a comprehensive human review, and you are given the platform to provide contextual, qualitative information that the algorithm may have lacked the capacity to measure.
It ensures the machine serves the human, not the other way around. And organizations are being smart about how they roll this out. They aren't just dropping this massive socio-technical system on the entire company overnight. They are doing controlled, experimental rollouts.
Yes. Westover outlines a tech company that piloted these continuous AI-assisted, empathy-led changes exclusively within their product development division for a year. They left the traditional annual review in place for their sales division as a control group.
Why do that?
They needed to prove the efficacy of the system to ensure it actually reduced burnout and drove engagement before undertaking the massive cultural effort of a global rollout. It builds organic trust when employees see it working for their peers.
And that trust ultimately has to start at the absolute top of the corporate hierarchy. What's fascinating here is how leading organizations are finally holding their executive suite accountable for this cultural transformation. They aren't just telling middle managers to be empathetic, they are changing how the C-suite is evaluated through something called a manager quality index.
This is the linchpin that guarantees the survival of the entire IPM framework. A multinational corporation implemented this manager quality index, and they tied an astonishing 30% of a senior manager's entire performance evaluation to it.
30%. That is a third of a senior executive's bonus and career viability, completely untethered from revenue or product launches. What exactly does the index track?
It synthesizes all the layers we have discussed. It tracks their team's aggregate engagement scores, the voluntary turnover rate within their department, their internal promotion velocity, meaning how effectively are they training their people to move up, and the 360-degree feedback regarding their empathetic coaching effectiveness.
So, under this integrated model, you could be a rainmaker. You could hit 150% of your revenue targets, launch 3 new products, and crush your financial OKRs. But if you burned out your team to do it, if your top engineers quit in exhaustion, and if you never mentored anyone to take your place, you fail your own performance review.
You do, because the organization recognizes that your short-term financial win was achieved by cannibalizing the long-term human capital of the firm. The Manager Quality Index forces leaders to care about human development with the exact same intensity they care about profit margins. It makes empathy structurally mandatory for survival at the executive level.
It brings the entire theory into a flawless synthesis. You use the multidimensional metrics from Layer 1 to accurately measure the manager's holistic impact on their team's processes. You use the predictive AI analytics from Layer 2 to surface those engagement insights transparently and audit for bias. And you enforce the empathy of Layer 3 by making human development the very metric the leader is judged upon.
It is the complete reimagining of what an evaluation is designed to do.
So to bring this massive paradigm-shifting journey together for you, the listener, we started in the murky, biased, incredibly stressful waters of the traditional annual performance review. We saw how a system built for an extinct industrial age is hopelessly mismatched for modern knowledge work.
We saw how the Ratter effect turns your evaluation into a mirror of your boss's cognitive biases, and how the dual-purpose dilemma destroys psychological safety and forces you into defensive impression management.
We then explored the false, dangerous promise of simply tracking more continuous data. We acknowledged the stark reality that without a human-centric psychological framework, continuous evaluation inevitably devolves into continuous surveillance, driving employees to metric gaming, spiking cortisol levels, and ultimately destroying the financial value of the firm.
But then we looked at the actual solution. We unpacked the integrated socio-technical system. We saw Layer 1, multidimensional metrics that measure the holistic reality of how you work, collaborate, and support your team, not just the final output you produce.
We explored Layer 2, AI analytics that process that complex data, spot the behavioral markers of burnout before they happen, and audit human language to eliminate unconscious bias.
And finally, Layer 3, empathy-led leadership, where managers are trained and financially incentivized to provide a safe developmental space where you can actually grow.
Whether you are a senior leader trying to architect a more sustainable system for your organization, or an employee simply trying to navigate the complexities of your own career, understanding the interplay of these 3 layers is your ultimate defense against the destructive, outdated evaluation models of the past.
The future of work dictates that we must stop treating peak performance and human well-being as a zero-sum trade-off. They are deeply, biologically, and economically linked.
Which leaves us with a final, somewhat provocative concept to chew on as we wrap up. If performance and well-being are now this inextricably connected, and if the layer 2 predictive AI becomes so highly attuned to our digital exhaust that it genuinely knows you're burning out months before your conscious mind even realizes it, what does that mean for our own sense of agency?
That is the philosophical frontier of this technology.
Because in the future, maybe the ultimate flex of a high-performing employee won't be their ability to grind through exhaustion. Maybe the ultimate skill will simply be their ability to put their ego aside and accept automated empathy. When the machine algorithms gently tap you on the shoulder and say, based on your communication network and your task velocity, that you need a break, will you be wise enough to listen to it?
Adapting to that level of systemic care might be the hardest psychological shift of all.
Thank you so much for joining us as we explored this research. We will catch you next time.